Hello and welcome to the Convex Conversation with me, broadcaster Helen Foss-Barrow. Today we head to Connecticut on the east coast of America to meet someone who calls himself a fairly normal guy from Pittsburgh, but he's not that normal. Miles Spencer has mentored tech founders for more than 30 years and has created hundreds of jobs while founding, financing, building and exiting 3 digital media companies. But he's also strayed a long way from home. He's led 1,500 people across 14 miles of open sea in kayaks, raising more than $1 million for charity, run with bulls in Pamplona, and trekked 1,100 miles through the deserts of Saudi, Jordan and Syria with his great friend from the Navy Special Forces Parachute X-Company, Wells Jones. The eye-opening trek inspired Miles and Spencer to write A Line in the Sand, a sleuthing adventure I discovered recently, capturing the essence of the Middle East through the eyes of 2 lifelong friends, following a trail of clues left by Lawrence of Arabia. It became an Amazon bestseller. So, Miles, you are no ordinary bloke to me. How do you describe yourself?
I absolutely think of myself as a father first. That was a gift that I was given in my 50th year, so a late starter. However, I will bring up the point that my namesake, great-grandfather, Miles Spencer, had 24 kids and had his last kid when he was 74. So I've got plenty of time left if I choose to. But I have 2 wonderful kids and I spend a great deal of my focus and time on that first. And what I find to be interesting is in mentoring those 2 kids, the similarities with mentoring entrepreneurs are legion and not necessarily coincidental. So I start with that, at least I have for the last 13 years. That does leave me a little bit of time for forming companies. So I introduce myself typically as a tech founder, an entrepreneur, an investor. But also Wells and I, who co-authored the book, really believe that there is a virtuous circle with the wonderful technology that we've been given at the second half of our lifetimes. And that's the ability to spend some time on screens, but use it to discover things that we may want to pursue and have the curiosity to pursue those through adventure. And that adventure can be amplified through the research that we do. So even though the headlines have the numbers thousands in them and hundreds in them, the reality is, as an entrepreneur, one does these amazing high wire acts, but not without the great amount of research that gives you the courage of conviction to really make it seem like it's not as risky as the rest of the world perceives it to be. So that perhaps is the trick of Kayak for a Cause, of A Line in the Sand, of several of the other adventures that Wells and I have been on, is we always had the courage of our convictions and our training and our research to go out and venture forth.
And is that where the collaboration with tech comes in then, to make sure that you're safe and that you're well researched when you take on some of these crazy adventures?
Well, it sounds good in the rearview mirror, but in reality, we were just doing what we felt we had to do and using tech in order to achieve it. So it was not a story of we have all this wonderful tech, let's go design an adventure. I'm more of the type that, as is often said in pirate stories, right? Like, there's a wonderful island over there. We're stranded here. Right? If you want to figure out how to get to that island, don't spend your time building a boat. Tell your people about the wonderful food and entertainment that's on that island. They'll figure out a way to build that boat. Well, technology is that boat. And that's what allows us to get from island to island and adventure to adventure. So 2020 hindsight, that technology enabled us to do all these things, but it took me a long time to come to that conclusion.
And how have you found fatherhood in your 50s?
Keeps me young. So my oldest is now 13. So I've aged as well, at least numerically. My doctor says I'm still solidly in the 40s in terms of effective age. I find that I also learn from them tremendously. They use screens differently. They communicate differently. I grew up with one foot in the world of telephones, ringing, not knowing who it was on the line. First thing I had to say was, hello, this is Miles Spencer from the Spencer family. Who may I say is calling? None of that happens anymore. We dialed with a rotary dial, and early days, we were on a party line. So literally there were a few other houses on the street sharing the same line.
That was probably me, Miles. I was often on a party line too.
Right. There was some interesting surveillance opportunities there if you did it right. But I began in that world, and I have the great fortune to live in a world today where I know who's calling. I pick up or don't. I send messages to my kid, partner, and the rest of the world at my choosing. I choose not to be on my device 24/7. I don't get notifications. I choose when to be on. Do you know you can gray out your screen because the apps on your screen have been developed to look like candy? You can gray them all out. They're significantly less attractive, and it turns it into utilitarian mode, which is I actually need to check this stat. I will go to that app.
Well, you've only got 23 more kids to go. Was it your grandfather or great-grandfather you said had 24?
That was my great-grandfather, Miles Sharpless Spencer. Sharpless is the name I use when I order coffee at Starbucks, because if they're going to call things venti and tall and grandissimo, they don't really have the opportunity to debate whether my name is real or not. But Sharpless was actually my great-grandfather's name. Popular back in the day, I guess. This was 1850s, and it means someone that lives near the sharp valley of the hill. So there you go. Yes, he had 24 kids. My grandfather was the 23rd of 24, and his father was 74 at the time that he was born. So he wasn't around too much longer. But my grandfather, Herbert, fought in the First World War, Battle of the Somme, and was a sniper for the Big Red One, which is the U.S. First Army.
My grandfather, too, fought in the Battle of the Somme, but your grandfather was lucky to have made it to this world, because not many children are number 23, are they?
No, not in Clearfield, Pennsylvania. And his father passed away when he was 4. So he and his brother, Byrd, B-Y-R-D, I don't know where we get these names, Central Pennsylvania, Spencer, they went down the street to their uncle's house and said, Dad's passed away, not a lot of food on the table. It's all right if we live here. Robert says, yes, of course. However, you'll have to work. And so at 4 years old, my grandfather started in a coal mine and worked there till he was 15 or so, till he volunteered for the Army, faking his age. But his ability to shoot squirrels with a .22 rifle for dinner allowed him to qualify as a rifleman in the Army. So he got to tour Europe, as many Spencers do, with a rifle.
Wow, he grew up in such a different world. And I'm kind of hoping that there was more than one great-grandmother on that side.
Yes, that's often a follow-up question. There were 3.
That's still a lot of children. I was intrigued. We touched on tech at the beginning and talked about them in the same line as mentoring your children. And on your website, actually, I don't have it to hand, but there is a line under you. Your byline talks about mentoring children and entrepreneurs in the same breath. What are the similarities and learnings from each, do you think?
Well, one that I like to remember is actually from an artist, is Picasso. He said, it took half my life to learn how to paint like a child. And so I really look to my kids to simplify things for me, to prioritize things for me, and take clues from them. I think entrepreneurs, for better or for worse, tend to be obsessive. It's a good thing, but overthink things. Don't leave things to chance. And sometimes get all caught up in their underwear and can't take the next step. And kids have no problem with that. And so I try to match that to entrepreneurs in that we can figure things out in the future. Like to have a plan, start with a plan, but most things in the startup world take longer and cost more than you expect.
I found you through your desert adventure, really. Or really, you found me, actually, to be fair, which is exciting that somebody's found the Convex Conversation stateside and started a conversation. And I'm intrigued by your desert adventure. You trekked 1,100 miles across various deserts. Tell me all about it and how that idea first came about.
Well, the idea first came about when I was sitting on a back porch in Connecticut shortly after 9/11. Years after 9/11, but short enough. The wounds were still raw. We were still trying to figure out why and who and how this could happen here on the shores of America. I'd read some books on the Middle East, on Islam, on Arabic culture, etc. It just wasn't doing it for me until I found Seven Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence and a psych profile written by Jonathan Mack called The Prince of Our Disorder. And Prince of Our Disorder, oh gosh, I was putting together in my mind at the time that perhaps somebody 100 years ago had tipped off what's happening now and what happened in 2001. And as luck would have it, Wells Jones wandered onto my back porch on his way from Washington, D.C. to Vermont and said, Miles, what are you reading? I said, well, Seven Pillars of Wisdom, generally T.E. Lawrence. Why are you reading it? Again, the curiosity, right? So I'm just trying to figure out in my own humble way what happened. And he said, I've been reading the same thing. And I think this guy really might have the key to understanding the Middle East in general. And as our conversation continued, we resolved there was really only one way to truly understand, and that was to go there ourselves. And so we mapped the journey based on T.E. Lawrence's Seven Pillars of Wisdom, which is generally from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, through Al-Wej, Aqaba, Wadi Rum, Karak, Chevalier, and of course, Israel and Jerusalem. And we plotted a journey, but we didn't have an invitation.
That could be tricky.
So we booked half the journey due to arrive in Amman, and perhaps a week beforehand, we got an inquiry from YPO, Young Presidents Organization in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. These are entrepreneurs that all run their own businesses. You can see the theme that's common there. And they said, would you come speak to us about entrepreneurship and bring your book, which I had written back in the .com. I said, well, I'm going to have my assistant travel with me.
Your assistant Wells.
My assistant. That's how we got in. And once inside the tent, it was wonderful. They opened up and they said, what else can we do? We're so pleased that two Americans have come to visit. And we had a different story to tell them what happened on 9/11. And through that, we got to Jeddah and we began our trek. And the objective was to just meet people, explain our story, convey our curiosity. And we were often asked, especially at borders, occasionally with Kalashnikov and AK-47s pointed at us, what are you doing here? And our answer was simply, we came to see with our own eyes and to understand.
Can you describe any of what it was like? Because for me, it's difficult really to imagine other than a lot of sand through the desert. But what was the scenery like? What were the people like? What are those flavors and learnings that you took away from what sounds like an incredible adventure?
Well, so much of that is in the book, and I couldn't do it justice in 45 minutes or having Wells on with me. It is, first of all, it's vast beyond my imagination. It is hot beyond my imagination. I can remember one day in Wadi Rum, we're on camels. We clocked 129 degrees Fahrenheit, and our guide did find some shade coming up in a rock outcrop. And he happened to know that there was an old well there where the camels could drink. And as we passed into the shade, eventually we looked and it was 96 Fahrenheit. It's 30 degrees less.
Much cooler.
Oh, it was as if we were in a mountain stream at 96 Fahrenheit. The camels had their drink. They take a lot on board in a very short period of time. Their shelter, their transportation, on a desperate day, their food. And Wells and I have experienced that as well. Doesn't taste like chicken. But it's just these wonderful beasts. I mean, once I got to know my camel, I couldn't approach Wells's camel because it was just not something my camel would tolerate.
And were you sleeping under the stars?
Oh, yes. And yes, really no light pollution there. So sleeping under the stars really means you're going to see a lot of stars. And, after a long day in the desert, the temperature would plunge. So much so that we had sleeping bags that were rated for basically Arctic adventures. If needed, we could actually get beneath the covers. I think the lowest temperature was probably in the 40s. But when you're coming from nearly 130 degrees, it's quite a difference. You do wake up with some stiff bones. There was really never any fear of what would happen in the night. Slept in the forest and things like that. And you do have the issue of what's going to come upon us, right? It doesn't really happen in the desert, or we didn't experience that. Snakes, I suppose. So we did check our bags in the morning to make sure we were alone. But the stars and the evening meals were truly special. Wow, we did sleep well.
Also, cuisine-wise, did you get to experience some interesting dishes? Because I do note that when we do move on to talk about the fiction book you wrote, you included some recipes.
We did. I grew up in a restaurant in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so food has always been an important thing for me. And now in my current vintage, we really put an emphasis on going to market, sourcing local food, getting inspiration from that, gathering around the counter, preparing it together, cooking it together, sitting around the table and solving the problems of the day. Those are such valued moments in our lives. And some of that we were able to experience in the desert. Now, some of those meals were quite humble. I can remember our guide in Wadi Rum, which is a moonscape where perhaps Dune or Star Wars should have been or was filmed. But we're traveling across that on camel. And towards the end of the trip, we actually got to his village. Exhausted, starving, in desperate need of a shower.
Sand in between your toes and everywhere, I would imagine. Amazing where sand gets, eh?
Absolutely. And some saddle sores of epic proportion. So we washed up. They took the clothing that we had in just a single backpack that we were coming with and went off to wash it somewhere without request, just as a welcoming hospitality. And we were prepared a meal by the women who we barely see. We sat on the floor on carpets and pillows, and they brought down what looked like a shield round device, which had been what they had been cooking the lamb stew on. And eat with your right hand. Your left hand is behind you so that actually many people can get around the serving tray. There was only one. There's a particular way to form your rice in your hand, almost like a sushi ball, and then drag it through the sauce and gravy and meat. As guests of honor, we were offered to eat some very interesting parts, and we did honor them with that curiosity. And it's still one of the most memorable meals Wells and I have had. But that, in contrast to meals we had in the royal palaces in Jeddah and Asir, when we came to meet and work with one of the Saudi royal princes, at the end of the day, the cooking was similar.
Was it?
But the presentation was quite different. They're both memorable for their own reasons, but we'll never forget that first meal coming out of the desert.
What struck you most culturally about this adventure, do you think?
Yeah, I think the learnings on the last page of the book are really critical to what we took away. We certainly didn't have any of those learnings going in. We just went to be open and curious as possible. And I think because of that openness, we were able to experience and observe and perhaps understand that family is crucial to them. Person-to-person interaction is crucial to them. Religion is crucial to most everyone in that region. We've been talking about Saudi, so of course that's Islam. But interestingly enough, on our trek and in the book, there are scenes in which Wells and I discover that the prophets of the deserts and the stories of the deserts are shared by all three religions. And that blew us away. There's a town called Al-Shayab, which was a place where Ezra and Hagar and Abraham were said to have descended for a small monument there. And our guide is speaking to us in somewhat broken English. And we're listening to these names, and they sound familiar. Wells has a better in-depth biblical scholar understanding than I do. But we all recognize the names. And I asked the guide, "This is in the Quran?" "Yes." "Well, this is in the Bible." Yes. I did have a satellite phone at the time, not like today, right? But I did have a satellite phone. And I called a Talmudic scholar, a friend of mine, and I said, I'm going to give you, it's like, he hadn't heard from me for a while. I'm calling from the desert in Saudi. I'm like, hey, everything all right? Everything's okay. Can you tell me, I'm going to read you a list of names, and you tell me how many of them are in your book? 100%. So we realize the similarities, not just religion, but in other values, are the defining factor, and the difference sometimes marginal. The differences get amplified, the differences get press, the differences drive us apart, but our experience was that the similarities were the majority and the differences were marginal.
And what were the biggest challenges, perhaps more on a practical front, that you faced? Because 1,100 miles across that kind of terrain is pretty hardcore.
I guess the personalities match the challenge. Wells and I do like to push ourselves. Wells and I are well practiced in extreme adventures. We chose our gear wisely. That did include a tough Panasonic, I think was the brand, Tough Book, which enabled us to seal our computer from the sand, etc. A BGAN transmitter that was a satellite transmitter that went and actually pack into our backpack. Again, this is not today. This is a little while ago. We also had a beacon. Each of us had a beacon that we purchased that in tight spots we would be sure was on our body, even if we were searched down to the skivvies. It's almost like a scene out of Spinal Tap. But basically, if that beacon was pulled and it sent a message to OSS, which delivered a message to a KNR carrier, which would allow someone to track us. So assuming that the transmitter stuck with our bodies, right? But at least somebody knew that something had gone bad. We had a retractable solar panel, which we carried in our backpacks. And believe me, we didn't check bags anywhere. This was what you have is on your back, right? So we packed very carefully. Let's share a little story about the plan and the reality. Every little square inch of our backpacks had been thought through. But when we were in Yanbu, which was said to have been the first headquarters of T.E. Lawrence in the Arab Revolt, it's on the coast just south of Aqaba, they were restoring a house which was said to have been his. We went for a tour in the moonlight. I mean, this was midnight at least. You could hear still the muezzin call to prayer in the background. It was surreal. And in this particular building, the roof was off. They were restoring it. And so we could see the moonlight. We got the tour by moonlight, perhaps one flashlight. And the man giving the tour was so proud. He was the man that was restoring it himself at midnight. These random visitors who had showed up and their guide. And just by simple request, he dropped everything and said, well, yes, of course. And he presented us with a tile from that house. It looked like it could have been from the 19s, 100 years old. And so it could have been a tile that Lawrence walked across. No proof of that, but just the fact that the possibility was there. We accepted the gift. You must accept the gift. And we asked permission and broke it up into small pieces so that we could put it into our backpack easily. And we completed the rest of the trek with those pieces of the tile the whole way. We got to one checkpoint. This was Israel, coming across a bridge called the King Hussein Bridge, the northern part of Israel. Comes from Jordan, not far from Syria. And this is a very high security checkpoint. And the fact that two Americans who had been east of the Jordan River for 26 days and were now crossing on foot with shaved heads and backpacks and had this tile with the cement in the back was unusual.
A little bit suspect, eh?
So they tested for Senex and explosive devices, etc. Tested negative. Just a simple tile.
What a beautiful gift to be given. That's really quite special, I would imagine.
It really was. It's the story that goes with it that makes it special.
And in terms of travel partner, I'm guessing you couldn't get much better than Wells, a former Navy SEAL parachute man, who you told me before we started recording was the sixth man to free fall over the South Pole. So he sounds like the right adventuring partner to take with you.
Good partner to choose. He would want me to point out that he was not trained as a SEAL, but he is Parachute X. I guess that's a designation I'd like to try to get right. And likewise, the sixth man to parachute over Antarctica. That's a designation very important in that group of people. But truth be told, we met in church. And the church that we attended at the time, one of the aspects of that church was a Stoic philosophy that almost boiled down to mind over matter. It would be a very popular, rebranded religion today for sure. But a lot of the things that we practiced there, we still practice today, and we practiced on the trek. So that's where we met. We shared a curiosity for venture, entertainment. At one point, I hosted a entrepreneur's television show on PBS here in the U.S. and 17 countries overseas called Money Hunt, which entrepreneurs would pitch their ideas, give them thumbs up or thumbs down. But during the dot-com era, Wells was my on-air coach and executive producer, not director, but I learned a tremendous amount from him in the decade that we did that together. So we have a lot of different overlaps, and good partner to have.
And now you're also authors, because your trip led you to writing your novel, A Line in the Sand. It stars Magnus and Finn, lifelong friends, fictional characters, but perhaps loosely based on your friendship and on your trek.
I would say slightly tighter than loosely based. We didn't make much of this up, but we felt that important that these be fictional characters because there are some elements in the book that just didn't happen. So this is a historical fiction, and you'll have to read the book to find out why, but it allows one to understand that region of the world perhaps a little better in current present day, but also in 1918, which our theory is more or less when this all began.
And it's a sleuthing adventure, isn't it? Tell me a little bit about the story.
Well, Magnus and Finn are adventurers, curious, but don't really know what's up next. They just remain open to the next adventure as it presents itself. It begins with a run through Pamplona and the San Fermin Festival, and it's beautifully narrated by a man named Eduardo Ballerini. So the Audible book is actually my preference because his spoken words are so much better than my written words, but they're the same words. But I tip my hat to Eduardo for that. So they begin in San Fermin and have a little episode with some four-legged 2,000-pound characters, and that leads them to a bar in Oxford, which leads them to a grandmother's house nearby. And there are two characters that are pivotal to the book. Jeremy, who is Israeli, Jewish, British, and Abdu, who is Saudi Lebanese, but growing up in Paris. And the two of them actually met in a summer camp called Seeds of Hope. And this is based on a camp that actually exists in Maine where they get Palestinians and Israelis together every summer. Young kids that work on conflict resolution and then go back. And many of those kids are grown now. Many of those kids are in positions of influence and power on both sides of the Jordan. And we just thought it was such a wonderful thing that we were able to experience that in real life, but we wanted to share that in the book. So that's where Jeremy and Abdu are from. And Jeremy and Abdu are really the proxies through which Magnus and Finn are able to experience these deep, deep relationships. And grandmothers are a very important part of that because grandmothers can cook. And so apologies in advance to the reader, but one will be hungry after listening to the descriptions that are prepared both by grandmothers in Oxford and in London and in Paris. And then, of course, the book travels to the Middle East, and there are grandmothers there cooking up all kinds of wonderful foods in Saudi and Jordan and Syria. And of course, Magnus and Finn avail themselves to those feasts at every opportunity.
And they're following the trail of clues left by T. Lawrence, or as is more affectionately known, Lawrence of Arabia.
That's correct. And the device by which those are delivered are a simple backpack that one of the grandmothers has preserved over the years. And they're relatively simple looking items in the backpack. But the grandmothers are convinced that these contents will lead to a greater understanding. Magnus and Finn have to figure out why. And I have to say, the clues would be discarded in any tag sale for relatively little or no money. But it's the grandmother's conviction and their cooking that allow Magnus and Finn to really dig in deeper. And as they do, they get sucked in.
Well, you've whetted our appetite. I've ordered my copy and it's arrived, and I haven't had chance to read it yet, but you're next on my list. You mentioned running with the bulls in Pamplona and being basically chased by four-legged 2,000-pound characters, but you've actually done that yourself in fairly recent times, haven't you?
Yes, it's true. Wells and I were on a turn called Mercaderes, and there is a certain way to run with bulls.
Fast.
Yeah. And once again, we did our research in order to mitigate risk, but there was risk there. So it's basically an S-turn, right? And bulls are large. They run fast over a short period of time. They've grown up in these wonderful fields surrounding Pamplona with their brothers. And then all of a sudden they're cooped up for the night. And so when they're released, it's on. They have these little hooves that don't really do well in cobblestone. Well, if you call them cobblestone over there, but we do. And so an S-turn presents some interesting challenges, both for bulls and for sprinters that are trying to avoid them. So the short of it is the pros are in the first S-turn, Ayuntamiento, Mercaderes. There's a turn there called Dead Man's Turn. I'm not sure why.
I hope you weren't in that turn.
And, well, actually, yes. Because of the fact that the bulls are at full speed, they're going to go into the wall at Ayuntamiento because they basically have too much inertia. And so if you know they're going to go into that first wall, you can stay to the left-hand side of that. But on the next turn, which is Dead Man's, you have to cross over so that they don't pin you against that wall. And so that little stretch is called Ayuntamiento. It's about 50 yards, about 50 meters. And done properly, it's the most beautiful thing in the world. You can get closer to the bulls than anything else. And that is where I and Wells, but also Magnus and Finn, chose to run the Saint Firmin. And I guess the point of my story is that most of the things, including this in the book, we've done.
What was it like? What was the adrenaline like at the time?
It's a 40-yard dash. It's a 40-meter dash, right? You're not running for the full mile. You can't keep up the bulls. So you've got to choose your spot. As the bulls approach, there is a camera above that runs on a transom. And so you can hear the zing of the camera above the lead bull. So you know when you hear the zing, it's close. The next thing you see are the eyes of the other runners that are closer to the bulls. And you can see the difference in their eyes as the bulls get closer, until the eyes that you are looking at are not your compadres. They are those of the lead bull. It's time to get going.
Oh my goodness. Often on these episodes, I end up doing something that a guest has talked about. And the one thing I definitely know for sure I won't be doing is running with bulls, but it is fascinating to hear about it. In the introduction, I mentioned that you did a lot of kayaking and raised a lot of money for charity. You founded Kayak for a Cause. How did that come about and what did it involve?
So once again, it was a curious question of, I wonder if we can do that. I was out with another adventure partner. His name is Scott Carlin. He's an entertainment executive. I have a background in entertainment. So we're out kayaking in Long Island Sound, beautiful little body of water, 14 miles across where we are. So you can see the other side and I wonder if anybody's ever done that. I wonder what it would take to do that. I wonder whether it's safe to do that. I wonder how the heck we get back if we do that. We should have answered that last question first. So Scott and I set out one day. We didn't tell our wives at the time anything more than we'd be gone for a little while. We kayaked across and packed sandwiches and had mobile phones to make calls and had all these ridiculous security measures. And we got over there. We were attacked by horseflies. We were not going to stay very long. But we had gone based on a bet from one of my other friends, $50 if you could make it across. So we took one picture and we made it back. And this person basically reneged on the bet. It's like, you had no proof.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. We adjourned to the local bar to talk through our adventure. And some other folks said, I would have given you 100, 200, or 500. It's like, okay, we'll bring you with you next time. That next time there were 8, then there were 40, then there were 175. And then by the 5th year, I think we had sponsors of Land Rover and GQ magazine, Diageo, one of the alcohol companies, very handy. We had 350 kayaks, which we had purchased ourselves by then, measured out for everyone's exact height and weight and skill and ability. We would bus people over because another thing we figured out was with such a large armada, landing on the other side, exhausted, it was very difficult to get back. So after a certain point, someone in the organization said, why don't we just start from down there and have a party with beverages here in Connecticut?
That sounds a much better plan.
Much better plan. Well, Wells did a phenomenal job, which is his background of setting up Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers and Frankenreiter of Jack Johnson fame and the Wailers, you name it. Wonderful bands that we would produce on the beach. And it became a big, big party with a little kayak adventure to start.
And you raised a lot of money for which charities? Small charities or one particular big one?
No, what we soon find out was that all of the kayakers had an idea for which charity we should give to. So we had a rotating charity nomination process, which was run by another colleague, Ryan Moran, who did a phenomenal job of pulling charities in, allowing them to participate, and the media around it was beneficial to them as well. So their exposure at the party was also of great benefit to them because of the number of people at the party. One was Save the Sound, which we have the unique designation of funding the defense of. There was an oil platform that was proposed to go in smack in the middle of Long Island Sound by one of the large petroleum companies. And we paid for the lawyer that defended against that application. And when it was defeated, we got the call of thank you from Save the Sound, because we had essentially at that point funded Leah's salary. And Leah was the one that got that done. So one of the greatest accomplishments of Kayak for a Cause is a oil platform that does not exist.
Well, congratulations on that. Before I let you go, AI is a really hot topic at the minute. A lot of talk about the good that AI can do. And also, I think there's fear around AI and whether it would take people's jobs or the more mischievous side of such high tech. I just wondered, as somebody who's spent his whole career in that tech world, what your thoughts are and whether you're excited by the advent of AI and whether indeed you have any worries about it too.
I confess I'm a huge fan of AI. And here's why. I think similar to .com, similar to mobile, this is an innovation that is going to speed up our development. And there will be perhaps, as my friend Greg Matusky, who runs a PR firm in Philadelphia, who has adopted AI, he said to me at the advent of this, there may be 3 types of people affected by AI. The first type has been trained in the rotary phone, prints things out, marks things up, faxes things in, and that's the way they've always done it. They've been paid well enough for that, and they're going to phone it in. They're going to do things the way they've always done things, and they're just not inclined to change much, and that's okay. That's their right. The second type will use AI to simply deliver what's expected of them from their bosses at their marketplace. It's like Google, right? I mean, before Google, we didn't have much ability to research things besides going to the library, and they go to paper books and a card catalog and the rest. So now we have Google, right? I don't have to disclose whether I've used Google to prepare for this podcast or not.
I have.
Right? But everybody wants to know whether you've used AI to prepare for this or that, etc. And the reality is it's a tool. The third type of person is that type that will use AI to become super freaks. They'll use it as a tool to write a screenplay and do better watercolors and have a better way to address children's need or medical problem, etc. We'll use that as a tool and just be so much faster at it because there's so much knowledge in the world that's getting duplicated in terms of its research, in terms of its transfer, etc. And the reality is, you can tell by your questions and my answers, I don't remember everything, even at the end of my story. So having a place where it can be remembered is a fantastic resource. As to the downsides, yes. I think with anything else, AI employed with laziness, whether that's in writing the prompts, editing the prompts, or reading or watching something that could have been created by AI, one must not let one's guard down in terms of that rigor and realize we're transitioning here. Remember, we lived in a world before the internet. We lived in a world before mobile phones. We lived in a world before AI. We've adapted to two of the three without too much care and trouble. Now it's our third chapter. Let's see how we do.
Our third chapter, well, we'll end on our third chapter and we'll end with a big thank you to Wells for finding the Convex Conversation, writing, telling me about your adventures. I thought he was offering himself as a guest and then very quickly handing an extraordinary bloke from Pittsburgh as opposed to an ordinary bloke from Pittsburgh to be part of the podcast. It's been brilliant to cross the pond and talk to you today, Miles. Thank you so much for slotting me into your diary.
Thank you so much.
You've been listening to adventurer, tech entrepreneur, businessman, and father of two, Miles Spencer. Download and subscribe to our series at convex.podbean.com or search The Convex Conversation on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to yours. I'll be back closer to home next week with another inspirational guest. So see you then.